Welcome to another installment of Officiating Wrestling by the Book. This session focuses on what we call the building blocks of wrestling. If you want to officiate wrestling, then you need to start by mastering these three key concepts. The first one, the concept of supporting points, knowing what they are and knowing where they are at all times. The second is the concept of inbounds and out of bounds, and knowing how to assess when a wrestler is inbounds and knowing when to determine that the wrestling action is now out of bounds and needs to be stopped. And the third is the concept of control, knowing when one wrestler has gained control, or when a wrestler has lost control, or when the wrestler retains control in all situations. We'll focus on the key scoring decisions that happen in wrestling, because what matters most are those scoring decisions. And what are they? Well, they're the basic ones that everyone knows in wrestling: the takedown, the escape, the reversal, and the near fall. If we decompose the NFHS definition of each of these, we'll see their common building blocks, and those are the concept of control, supporting points, and the inbounds and out of bounds rule. So let's start by taking a look at the takedown. The NFHS defines the takedown in Rule 5-25. It is a takedown when, from a neutral position, a wrestler gains control over the opponent down on the mat, and all the supporting points of either wrestler are in bounds. So let's break that down by the numbers here. Neutral position means neither wrestler has control. Gains control, Rule 5-6 tells us what the definition of control is. And basically, control equals restraining power plus the position of advantage. Down on the mat? Well, down on the mat means that the defensive wrestler's weight is not completely on the feet. And Rule 5-15-2A tells us what the usual points of support are when someone is down on the mat. And lastly, has to be in bounds. There again, Rule 5-15-1 tells us when a wrestler is considered in bounds, and Rule 5-18 tells us when out of bounds occurs. Look at the building blocks of the takedown. The neutral position, that's dependent on what the control situation is. Gains control, of course, again, the control situation. Down on the mat, again, that means we need to know the supporting points. And then inbounds, we need to know where the supporting points are and apply the inbounds and out of bounds rule based off where they're located. Now let's look at the escape. Rule 5-10 defines the escape. An escape is when the defensive wrestler gains a neutral position and the opponent has lost control beyond reaction time while all supporting points of either wrestler are in bounds. So again, let's break this down. Defensive wrestler, that is the wrestler who is being controlled. Neutral position, the escape cannot occur unless we get to a neutral position. If we get to a neutral position, then we will also have lost control. But neutral means neither wrestler has control. Losing control means that by Rule 5-6, the wrestler has to lose both the restraining power and the position of advantage, both of them. If the wrestler retains one of them, they can retain the control. And lastly, supporting points have to be in bounds. Again, Rule 5-15-1 guides us on what the supporting points are and the inbounds rule. Next, let's look at the reversal. First, let's look at the building blocks of the escape again. Defensive wrestler, that means we have to assess the control situation. Neutral position, also the control position. Lost control, again, control. We have to understand what the concept of control is. And then lastly, supporting points inbounds. We have to know what those supporting points are, and we have to know what they are relative to the boundary lines and the rules on inbounds and out of bounds. So next, let's look at the reversal. Rule 5-22 defines a reversal for us. It is a reversal when the defensive wrestler comes from underneath and gains control of the opponent either on the mat or in a rear standing position while all the supporting points of either wrestler are in bounds. So again, defensive wrestler, the one being controlled. Gains control, same as before. Rule 5-6. As long as the wrestler gains both the restraining power and the position of advantage, they gain control. They have to have both. And lastly, supporting points in bounds. Again, Rule 5-15-1 guides us there. Looking at the building blocks for reversal, defensive wrestler, once again, the control situation tells us that. Gains control, again, applying the definition of control. And then lastly, supporting points in bounds. As always, knowing where the supporting points are and knowing the rule on inbounds and out of bounds and applying them. Lastly, let's look at the near fall. Rule 5-11 defines the near fall for us. A near fall occurs when the offensive wrestler has control of the opponent in a pinning situation and near fall criteria are met for a period of 2 seconds or longer. So if we break that down, offensive wrestler, that's the wrestler who has the control. Has control, again, Rule 5-6, we just have to apply the definition. And having control means having both the restraining power and the position of advantage. Or if the wrestler already had control, they have to retain at least one element of that, either the restraining power or the position of advantage. So have to gain both in order to gain control. To retain it, once you already have control, you have to just retain one of them. And then lastly, the near fall criteria are defined in Rule 5-11-2. And those, again, are, we have a defensive wrestler, their shoulders or scapula have to be in bounds, and then one of the 4 criteria for near fall. Either one, that they are both shoulders within 4 inches of the mat, or number 2, one shoulder touching the mat, the other within 45 degrees of the mat, or number 3, defensive wrestler in a high bridge held there by the offensive wrestler, or number 4, the defensive wrestler on both elbows. So let's look at the building blocks for the near fall. Offensive wrestler, again, the control situation dictates if we have an offensive wrestler. Has control, again, just applying our definition of control. Lastly, near fall criteria uses all 3 building blocks actually. First of all, we have to have a defensive wrestler, so that's the control situation. Shoulders are the supporting points, and Rule 5-15-2b tells us that the shoulders or scapula are the supporting points when the defensive wrestler is on their back, meaning they are in near fall criteria. And lastly, the inbounds and out of bounds rule. Got to know, again, how to properly assess whether we're inbounds or out of bounds. So, going forward from here, these building blocks are what give you a solid foundation for officiating wrestling. Know these concepts, and you'll be able to make good judgments and rulings consistently in all situations, most especially the scoring situations that involve the takedown, the escape, the reversal, and the near fall. And remember, those 3 building blocks are control, supporting points, inbounds, and out of bounds. Best of luck as you move forward in your officiating.